Stanford University.
I want to tell you all thank you for understanding about how we are having to change people around. There are meetings that have been called. There's a lot going on in the IPCC right now. I thought there was going to be a big announcement today. I will bet there's going to be a huge announcement in the next week. If it hasn't been, then we'll talk about it next week. I don't feel like I can talk about it right now. But there's a lot that's going on, so I know it's a teaser, but it's what's happening is there's so much hoopla going on that something is going to happen. Somebody's going to have to step down, I think. But anyway, so there's all of this stuff going on all at the same time. So there's a lot of people who've had to shift the times when they're going to be giving their talks, and we apologize for that, but that's just the name of the game. So I'm speaking tonight, and then next week Ben Santer is going to be speaking, and he is one of the scientists that have gotten the most mail hate actions, whatever. And he is also the person who, in the second assessment report of the IPCC, he's the one who penned the paragraph that said that nevertheless there is, it starts with a D. Dangerous. No. Anyway, it's saying that humans are affecting climate. So he was the first to do that. I'll show you what the second thing was. That came from my work, and that I'm going to talk to you about tonight. But Ben is still under the gun and is still getting a lot of hassles about it, and it is really cutting into how much science is getting done. So anyway, so Ben is going to speak next time, and then the time after that, Fran Pavley and Carol Browner are not going to be able to come, and so Michael Wara, who is in the law school, is going to be coming, and that was on the email explaining what that was going to be. Then the next one is going to be Lisa Curran, and she's going to be talking about RED, which is a huge debate right now. There are people over here saying yes, there are people over here saying no, and they're both kind of saying the same thing, even though they're coming to different conclusions. It's a very interesting interaction that's going on there. And then the last one is John Krosnick, and he is going to be talking about how the public is seeing this whole process. And I've seen him give about 3 speeches, and I think he's one of the best speakers I've ever seen. So if there's any way you can make it, try to make it to that one. He is really great. Okay, so now, let me tell you a little bit about me. When Charles introduced us, he said that I worked with birds, and I'm with the American Ornithological Society. But I also, in 1990, was a young presidential investigator, and Bush was the one who signed and said that I could have some money, which was nice, but Bush won. So that was good. I also became a Pew Scholar, which is, there were 10 people around the globe that were chosen each year to work on their scholarship on conservation to try and help conservation actions and getting things out to the public. That now has gone very strongly, that program has gone very strongly over into marine, so there's a lot of marine folks in that now. Then I was also a Aldo Leopold Leadership Fellow, and that was a program where they're trying to teach, at the time, middle level academics how to talk to the public. So that you don't sit there and say jargon and on and on and on. So that was that. And then I too was part, like Steve was, and Ben, was part of the IPCC third assessment report, which was fourth assessment report, which was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. So we have about this big of a piece of that Nobel Peace Prize, but still it was quite meaningful. I think it was really quite meaningful for the IPCC to end up getting that. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit, that tells you where I'm coming from. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on with plants and animals, because that's my whole shtick. Before I do that, I want to explain to you a little bit about some ecology. This has nothing to do, absolutely nothing to do with climate change. On the y-axis is just abundance relative to each other, and then years down here. And in about 1880, we decided we wanted to get rid of the wolves. And so we did a really pretty good job. We smushed down the wolves. But what we didn't expect was up popped the coyotes. Then we decided we were going to get rid of the coyotes. We did a pretty good job. We pushed down the coyotes. A second surprise, up popped the red foxes. So here is a community of 3 species. We know what we're doing to it. We know how we're forcing it. We know why we're doing it. And we have 2 surprises. So if what we're doing is we're pushing species communities in ways that we really don't know, i.e. by climate change, and we don't know the interaction among all of those species, we are going to have a lot of surprises. And that is what I wanted to get across here. I also want to get across the fact that how strongly species can be linked. So if you perturb one, there can be this domino effect that goes out. Okay, so what I want to talk to you today is our rapidly warming world. That's going to go really quickly. How species adapt to that rapidly warming world, using species as temperature proxies, and then what happens when species can't adapt. And this is the plot that, when I saw it, I was really quite concerned, because if you take the 100-year trend, you have a 0.05 degrees Celsius increase per decade, 100-year 0.07, 50-year 0.13, 25-year 0.18. So now what we're doing is we're telling species that even though we have dissected and changed the globe so much by our cities and for fields and things like that, we're now telling them that they also have to somehow cope with this rapidly rising climate change, and it's going much faster than species have been used to. Now this is talking about the sunspots. We saw that in the movie. The blue part is when the when there are few sunspots. So the sun is hotter here. The reds and blues are backwards. So the sun is cooler here and cooler here. This is now talking about the changing the radiance of the sun by geoengineering. And the thing that concerns me here is the acidity of the ocean. And we've already seen the acidity of the ocean going on. There we see what's going on with the shells. The shells are indeed being eroded by the carbonic acid. Here is an example that was done in a lab. It does truly affect species. And now you can see not only does it make it smaller, you can see that the carapace of the one on the left, you can see through and see the organs. So it's quite thin. So we do have to worry about what's going to go on in the ocean with the acidification. It's going to be quite a problem, I believe. Okay, so now how do species adapt? Well, there are many types of changes that we've been seeing, but the 2 primary ones, the first one is range shifts. And what the species are doing is basically they're following the isotherm that they're used to. So as the Earth warms up, that isotherm goes poleward or up in elevation. So that's what the species are doing. Species are very strongly attuned to temperature. So they're moving like that. And then if it's a marine species, it goes deeper in the ocean, because deeper in the ocean is quite a bit cooler. Now, if you have 2 species A and B, occurring basically in the same location, and it starts getting warmer, and species B needs to, it's too warm here for species B now, and it needs to migrate up, and it migrates up. The thing that's important here is that the two species are not going together. Darwin said that since communities were so strongly linked together, when it warmed, they would move up together, they'd move down together, they'd move sideways together. That's not at all what we're finding. We're finding that species are moving differentially, and that really is a concern, because what happens if B is the predator of A, and A happens to be a pest on our agricultural fields? Could be a problem. But it could be fine if A happened to be an endangered species and we're trying to have more and more higher population, and the predator B moves away. We can have more higher populations here now. So it's nothing's all bad, nothing's all good. But the other thing is that there is the possibility that when the species are moving and shifting, they're not going to be able to get to where they need to get to, which is, I just represented it by that rectangle. It can only get up that far for many different reasons. It could be that the New Jersey Turnpike goes right there. You know, who knows what's going on. I wouldn't want to be a turtle trying to cross the New Jersey Turnpike. And there are a lot of instances like that. How do they handle it? What do they do? So if only this portion is able to get into that region, what happens to the rest? Are they all going to die off, and then we're only going to have this big of a population? That's a possibility. So it's not going to go extinct, because we'll still have these individuals here, but there's not going to be a lot of individuals. This is an example of exactly what I was just talking about, and this is damage from the pine bark beetle in Colorado. And Steve and I drove with a postdoc of mine across Colorado, and we literally drove hundreds of miles, and the mountains looked just like this. And we stopped for lunch, and the postdoc didn't get out of the car, so I couldn't figure this out. So I went back and I said, "Come on, we got to eat." She was sitting in the back seat crying, because she'd never really understood how vast the changes are going to be. They're going to be vast. It's really changed what's going on in Colorado. This is what's happening in the upper peninsula of Michigan. Nope, in the lower peninsula of Michigan. This is the southern flying squirrel. It's a darling little animal. It's about like this without the tail. And it goes up to the top of the tree, and then it jumps, and it opens up its wings, basically, and it glides down. They're just fantastic. Anyway, the southern now is moving significantly north. But now the northern isn't moving significantly north because it can't get across the bridge. It can't get across the lake. So what is happening to it is its population is plummeting. So that's the type of thing that I think we need to be thinking is going to happen. Is at the edges of these continents. This isn't a continent, but it's similar to that for that poor little thing. They're not going to be able to get into an area where they can survive. Okay, another type of shift that occurs is phenological shift. And phenology, all I'm talking about now is timing. So it's the shift in things that we have a certain time on. And I'll bet you everybody's daffodils right now in your front yard are already up and blooming, right? Right. So did that happen 10 years ago? It truly didn't. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about as far as phenology. Flowers are blooming earlier, trees are blooming earlier, trees are putting their leaves out earlier, birds are arriving sooner from migration, they're laying eggs earlier, that type of thing. So there's a lot of shifting going on. This is one that I've studied extensively, and because it's a way to say what's happening around the globe. Is it the same time change around the whole globe? It's a global problem, so is it the same time change? And the work that I've done has shown that yes, it is. The The flowers over here are blooming just as exactly the same amount earlier here as they are in Europe or in Australia at the right latitudes. So this is a piece of work that I did a zillion years ago, again in Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Down here is years. On the y-axis is day of first arrival. And there was a woman who was trained at the University of Michigan as a wildlife biologist. She was the first woman to be placed outside, not behind a desk, outside in the field by Fish and Wildlife. So they put her someplace where nobody would see her. They put her up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Well, there's not much to do up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, so every single morning she walked this trail every single morning. And when she would see the first mourning dove, she would record that date. Then she would completely ignore mourning doves for the rest of the year. Well, you can see that the mourning dove is coming earlier and earlier and earlier and earlier, and now the mourning dove actually doesn't even migrate anymore. It's a resident on the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So they're coming earlier and earlier and earlier, and now it's resident. Now, some things are not going to do that. They're just coming earlier and earlier and earlier, and they're not going to become residents, but the mourning dove did. Now, there are winners and losers. This is a common cuckoo from Europe, and what happens is it is indeed shifting the time that it arrives from migration earlier. But the short distance migrants, this is one of the cuckoos, and this is its parent, its host parent. So the bird is a lot smaller than the young. The short distance migrants, which that means migrants that aren't coming from Mexico and the like, or Africa and the like, they're coming from a lot closer by. They're coming back a lot earlier than the cuckoo is. So they're actually able to court, mate, build their nest, lay their eggs, and have the young hatch before the cuckoo even comes. So they're able now to avoid what's happening. And so this is a good thing for them. It may be a bad thing for the cuckoo. It may be a bad thing for the late arriving or the long distance migrants, because now the long distance migrants are going to get all of the cuckoo eggs. Okay, so now this is an analysis that I did for the IPCC, the third assessment report, and it was just a huge big meta-analysis. All meta-analysis means is that I looked at all of the studies around the globe and wanted to see what was shifting in the spring. And at that time, this was in 2001, yeah, 2001, I found 61 studies that had been watching the phenology change for a long enough period of time to actually understand what was going on. That then was about 300 species, and here are the results. So frequency on the y-axis, and down here is the number of days changed per decade. Minus means they're coming earlier, plus means they're coming later. X here at 0 means that I'm not looking at any of the species that are not changing. There's a very strong bias in literature that if you don't find anything, editors don't want to really publish it. So you can't come out and say, well, the cuckoo isn't doing anything different. So you don't really know what's going on with the species that are not changing, so I don't look at them. There are other people who do, and I'm concerned about what they're doing, but anyway. But you can see there's this huge skew, huge. And the arrow is saying what the average is, and it's about 5 days per decade over the last, from now actually, not from 2001, from now, over the last 40 to 45 years. It's a big change. From that, I also did another meta-analysis, and I wanted to look at all of the changes all around the globe, not just the phenological ones, but all of the changes. So for this, I had 143 studies, and the thing is that ecological studies were very rarely longer than 4 years, because that was the funding that ecologists usually got, was for 4 years. So I had a graduate seminar, and we looked at over 3,000 papers that were candidates for this type of a study, and out of that we only got 143. So, and that's about 1,500 species that were actually changing. So what we did was we examined all the studies that examined temperature change. I didn't care about any other kind of change. It had to be temperature change because that's the easiest one to look at. You always do the easiest thing first. You had to have more than or equal to 10 years of data. Now the cutoff is 20 years. If I'd done 20 years, I would have had literally seven studies. Okay, and then the study also had to say that the species was showing a change, and the study had to actually say that the temperature was showing a change. Okay, so these are the locations. I put this up on a very similar slide. It didn't have Australia at the time. I put this up at the plenary of the IPCC because I was having to explain this. This was the new thing that was going to come out, and they wanted me to be explaining what was happening. And I put it up, and I said, and I think it represents very well. And I turned back around, and here's this sea of delegates, and they don't raise their hands. They put up their little flags. There was a sea of flags all of a sudden. I thought, oh, I spelled something wrong. I did something. I had no idea what it was. So you have to call on people, and I had left out Africa. So all the various nations in Africa were very upset with me. I said, well, the species in Africa aren't really affected by temperature yet. They're much more affected by precipitation, which is exactly why I didn't have Australia on there either. Since then, I have added Australia, but there still aren't any. Well, that's not true. When I did this, there was nothing in Africa, and they deal with precipitation. That's a whole other way of looking at things, which is tough. Okay, so now for all of the changes, remember we had about 1,500 species that were showing change. I dropped out those that showed no change. But of those 1,500, about 20% were going in the opposite direction of what I expected for global warming. So instead of going poleward, they're moving toward the equator. Instead of going up in elevation, they're going down in elevation. That type of thing. But 80% of them were doing exactly what we expected. Exactly. So if I flipped a coin 100 times, and 80 times it came up heads, I think all of us would say something's weighting that coin. Something's forcing that coin to be a little skewed. Yeah?
So none of them had no response.
Oh, yes. Uh-huh.
So there's 100% there.
Mm-hmm.
So 100, the way I'm looking at the slide is saying that 100% of the species shifted.
Because those are the only ones that I looked at. What I did was of the species that, there were studies that would say, this species changed this way, and this species changed this way, and this species changed this way. And by the way, there was also this species, and this species, and they didn't change at all. I didn't look at those because I couldn't tell you how many species there were. Yeah?
Would it be possible to gather, of all the species looked at, what percentage isn't shifting?
A woman named Camille Parmesan at UT Austin has been working on some of that. And what she does is she restricts the studies that she looks at to only those studies that look at all of the species in an area. And then that has everything. I have trouble with that even because I don't think, well, you can't look at every species in an area, even if it's birds. You can take bird watchers who are really good bird watchers and put them in an aviary, and we know what species are there, and we can leave them there for 5 hours, and they can come out, and they still don't know. They still don't have the right number. So I'm a little suspect of it. So that's what I do this on purpose. I look only at the species that are changing. So, Sure, no problem. Yeah.
The law of missing is sort of signal to noise ratio, because if there are a million species that are perfectly happy, this is kind of noise. So
This is not what?
It's noise.
This is noise?
Yeah, it's pretty...
Well, it's not noise for them. I mean, that's like saying, let's figure out how bad tobacco smoke is, and we'll find out for all of the population of the world how many people die of lung cancer. I don't think that gives you the right information for the question that's being asked. What you really need to be asking is, of those people who smoke, how many are getting lung cancer? They're two very different questions. So
frame the question that you're asking here.
Of those species that are changing around the globe, of the species that are changing, 80% of them are changing in the direction we would expect for global warming. Now, could there be 5 million that are not changing? There could be. I don't think there is anymore. There could have been a while ago, but I don't think there is anymore. But the other thing is that we know only 2 million species on the planet and have identified 2 million species on the planet. And we assume that...
You're saying 3/4 of the species. That was my question. So if we only know 2 million, 3/4 of the species that we know are different whenever this...
3/4?
Well, 1,473 species changed. Oh, I'm sorry.
Right. Right. So, I'm sorry? No, there are 2 million species. Actually, there's 1.8 million species that have been identified and categorized on the planet. That's it.
You're just studying birds.
No. This is all species. This is plants and everything. Yeah, I just like...
I've been looking at all these beautiful...
I'm sorry. Since I'm a bird nut, I always put birds behind them. So. No. This is everything. This is plants and animals. Right. So, how big? What you're asking, I think, is how big of a problem is this for all of the species? Right? That I can't answer. I don't think anybody can answer, because we don't know how many species there are. Yeah?
So you're really only looking at studies that have been done of species that have shown change. Every species hasn't been studied.
Absolutely.
So we don't have a complete record of...
That's right.
Okay.
Absolutely. So I don't think you can figure out what's going on with every species. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there any distribution that changes between families or orders?
People have looked at that, and it hasn't been apparent at all. Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
Have you seen or been able to look more closely at the 20% and try to
Yes.
explain that?
What's going on here in the 20%? An example is there is a whole suite of mammals. There are about 7 mammals that were being studied in Kansas, and they all went toward the equator. And I couldn't understand it until I actually looked at what was going on with the location of the temperatures, and the temperatures were cooler toward that region. So they were doing exactly what we would expect based on their physiology. They're going to a cooler region. It just turned out that cooler region didn't happen to be this way. So there's a lot of things like that in here. Yeah.
Do you think that I should look at this and conclude that a rising temperature and global climate change are causing 1,200 species to move north and into higher altitudes? You do? Because, what if there are other causes?
There are other causes.
Not related to global climate.
There are. There's a lot of things that change species. Habitat destruction is a huge one. Invasive species coming in is a huge one. What else? Poaching is enormous. Okay, the thing is that when I say as expected, it has to be in one direction. And I'm not going to see that one direction if all of those things are involved. So if there's habitat change, species, if it's up here, species aren't going to go that way. They're not going to go this way. They're going to stay around it. They're going to move this way maybe, or move that way.
There'd be an even distribution around. They would, some move north, some south.
That's right. That's right. Right. So yes, this is all circumstantial. It has to be circumstantial. There's no other way to do it. But it's such a large sample size, and everything is going in the way we expect. I feel very, very confident to say that it has to do with temperature. Yeah. Yeah.
So what you're saying is, even though you have some in the opposite, it's not really opposite of what you expected, because even though they might be moving south, they're going to a higher elevation or fluid.
That's right.
So it really should be, those are as expected.
That's right. That's right. But what I was doing was being very, 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 very careful, because this is being presented to literally 100 nations. And I wanted it to be very, very hardcore. So if it was going a way that we didn't expect, I said no. But yes, there are individuals in here that should be down here. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering, that we're in extreme old level extinction, or really this is one of the ways extinction is probably at a very high rate. I was wondering if these creatures are, because they're able to move, that may be because they're not trapped by some of the things that we build in places that we can. Are they more or less likely, do you have any feel for that, to go extinct, or there's probably
It's tough. It's tough because it depends upon where they are. If they are here up at the top of a mountain and they're shifting up, pretty soon it's going to get warm enough there's not going to be anything to do except go extinct. So, and the other thing is at the edges of big water bodies, there's no place for them to go again. Yeah.
So maybe talk some more for folks who aren't as familiar with the pine beetle. Because
Okay.
I think in many respects that's one of the best examples, because nobody wants them, right? And it isn't just Colorado. I go to British Columbia a lot.
British
and
Columbia.
They're just pumping their way up there.
That's right.
You know, there's dead trees everywhere.
Right. What's going on is that the bark beetle itself is kept in check. The range edge is kept in check by cold temperatures. And since it's getting warmer, it's not as cold in the wintertime anymore, then they can actually come out, they can breed, they can actually produce two separate broods. I don't know if that's what they're called. I'm not an insect person anyway. And what's happening, the main thing is what's happening is the cold weather is not killing off the beetles, and the beetles now are going into areas that they've never had beetles before, ever. So if we had the cold, then they wouldn't be moving up.
And the trees are stressed by hotter
The fungus.
temperatures and less rain, drier.
Yeah. Yeah, that is important too, but it's primarily the I think it's a fungus. Is it a fungus? I think it's a fungus that the bark beetles carry that cause blue heart disease. Red heart disease? Blue heart disease. Yeah, I think. I'm not sure about that. Yeah.
So did Camille conclude differently than you did?
Nope.
Or, okay. So
Nope.
her findings actually corroborate
Her-
yours.
Yeah, and that's why it was such a big splash, actually. What she did was she included the zeros here, and instead of finding 5 days per decade, she found 2 days per decade. So even with including these, but again, it depends on how many of these you include as to where that arrow is going to be. If you include so many that it completely swamps these out, it's going to be 0. So I have trouble with that. Yeah.
I mean, just go back on it. Doesn't it depend on whether you're trying to look at the impact of species, which is, and this particular species where this is quite relevant.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these are focus, or whether you're trying to use this as a gauge of global warming or climate change effects in totality on
In total. Right.
The fact that, you know, a few hundred species are suffering from differences isn't necessarily, globally speaking, a huge impact.
Right. But what I would say is that what we need to do is look at the percentages of this. 80% are changing, 20% are not. Then if you're talking about 2 million species that we know, I would say 80% are changing and 20% are not. You could go that way. Here, the trouble with this is in any meta-analysis, you have a publication bias. So people can't get published things that say, my species didn't change. So you just don't know how many are here. And that really affects what's going on. If this is 1 million or 1.5 million, then these don't matter at all. Right? Yeah.
They don't matter number-wise, but species, depending on what you think, have different reporting.
Absolutely. No.
That with
Absolutely.
Be a lumberman,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't have any doubts about it.
Sure. No, I'm not saying that the species aren't important. I'm just saying that in what I'm trying to do here. Yeah.
And one species can blow out a whole system if so interdependent.
Good. That's right. It could be. That's right. It could be. Okay. Can I move on? Okay. All right. So of the species that are changing, this is what I found. All right. So now let's go on and talk about species as temperature proxies. This work was what went into the third assessment report, and now the proxy stuff is now what went into the fourth assessment report. Now, the reason that I did this was I was sick and tired, literally sick and tired, of listening to all these naysayers say, well, we don't know anything about temperature because the thermometers aren't right, because their cities have grown around them. And so then people will say, well, we know that and we have accounted for that. And then they'll say, oh, so now you've massaged the data to make it into what you want it to be. So, and then they were talking about the satellite was not doing this and not doing that. I was getting really, really upset about it all. So I just decided species will tell us something that we don't have to worry about thermometers, we don't have to worry about satellites. So this is what I did. So here is what the temperature that I'm looking for to see if we can find that signal by species, by using species.
Wait, can you go back to something else for a second?
So this is, you did this on a species.
No. This is from thermometers. All I'm doing is saying, here is the trend that is seen in thermometers. Now let's see, this is thermometers. Now let's see what happens when we use species. That's all. Sorry, that wasn't clear at all. I apologize. Okay, first thing is that a long time ago, this was revolutionary, you wouldn't believe it, but species are very strongly affected by temperature. So here is the eastern Phoebe. This is the -4 degrees Celsius isotherm, and this line here is the edge of its range. So you can see that there's a very strong correlation that's going on. Species are very strongly related to temperature. Okay, this is again, you can see again here species are also affected by temperature. So you have the phenology, they're coming earlier and earlier and earlier. The sandhill crane, which shows a very good trend. Okay, now to do this, the first thing we have to do is it's a two-step process. First, we have to do detection. And what detection means is that the species are changing because they are detecting regional temperature changes. So that's the detection. Species are changing due to regional temperature changes. That's what was said in the third assessment report, was that species are changing due to regional temperature changes. Nothing at all about human. It's just saying that there are original temperature changes that the species, warming, that the species are tracking.
Quick question, what bird is that?
It's a toady. It's a bird about this big. It's a Cuban toady. Cuban? I think it's Cuban. No, I wish I did. I've never seen one. That's why I put it up. No. Okay, the second step is to attribute it, so attribution. The regional temperature change that the species have detected is actually being forced by anthropogenic forcings. So the detection is the species are detecting the temperature change. The attribution is that the temperature change is being forced by humans. Okay, so that's now what I need to do. That's what we called joint attribution, because there's two steps. You have to have both of them, or else it won't work. Okay, for this, what we had was about 145 species from 42 study sites. And I did this in the way, oh, you guys can't see this at all. Can you see the gray? Yeah. It's really, really gray here. Okay, the gray is really important. Okay, I was told not to move. I have to move this time. All right, so over here is the red temperature is the actual thermometer temperature. The gray stuff behind it, which I'll show you in a second, is what has been modeled with only natural forcings. So sunspots, volcanoes, the tip of the earth, that type of thing. Okay, so I can't believe you guys can't see this. Okay, so it does this. Can you see this at all?
Yeah.
Can you really? Ah, yes. Okay, so now it's coming down here. So it does pretty well in some places, but it blows it in other places. Then they did a model using only human-caused changes. And that fit pretty well, but again, it blew it in places. But then when they did the model and they put both anthropogenic and natural in, you can see that it fits very nicely. So what that, well, I hope you can see it. So this is basically the way that they did it in the third assessment report, that they were using thermometers that the naysayers were saying you couldn't use. Okay, so now what I did was, let's pretend that this is a study in the middle of Colorado. And at that study, someone has measured the temperature and has measured what the species has done. So it's come earlier, it's done something at that location. There's been a change. Okay, so now you have on this axis year, on that axis is average spring temperature. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at changes in phenology in the spring. I didn't say that clearly enough. So I'm looking at changes in phenology in the spring at these various locations. Those are the studies that I chose. So here's the temperature change at a particular location. Okay, and this is just the correlation coefficient. This is at the exact same location. Now we have day of first arrival. The numbers are just, the numbers of the year. And here are years down here. And now you can see that this species is changing quite a bit, and the correlation coefficient is strong. Okay?
Can you remind us about the correlation coefficient? If it's 0 and 1, if it's 1, it's perfectly correlated?
If it were 1, it would be going like this, right smack in the middle. If it's -1, it would be coming down just like that. Most people are used to talking about R-squared values. And R-squared values is basically take this value, square it, and then it tells you how much of the variability in the arrival time is explained by time passing. Right. So, but I needed these negative signs, so I didn't square them. And squaring them is actually for logistic regression, and I'm not doing logistic regression here, I'm just doing correlations. So it's a correlative. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
So the day of arrival is like the 100th day in, okay.
So this is measured by thermometer.
I'm sorry?
This is measured by thermometer.
This is measured by a thermometer. Yes. Yep, we're back to thermometer data. In one location, by someone that's in the field that's doing this. Okay? And this particular one stopped in 1995, right? There is a lot of variability. Right. Right. Okay, now, because both of these have year on the bottom, I can put the two plots together, and then what's going to be in the middle is what's going on by year. So those are the two that I just did, and now that's the phase plane. Now I have average spring temperature here, and day of first arrival there. And so now this is 1972, this is, I don't know what they are, I'm making it up, but anyway. Okay, but now this has also a regression coefficient on it. The regression coefficient is minus 0.35, and
You can't tell us you're making it up, because you need to understand it. I don't understand what we're looking at.
okay, what I did was I took these two plots, and since they're both in years, I can put them together into a phase plane so that I can then have day of arrival related to spring temperature. Okay? And so what I'm losing is the trend. I'm losing the yearly trend. The years now are going to be inside. That's what I'm going to do. So this is year, I don't know, 1967, and it's at, why did I pick a hard one? It's at 105, 101. Okay, and this one in 1967 is 41.5. Okay? Now, so 41.5, and at 100, whatever I said, 101, there's going to be a point that is going to be 1965. Okay? And that's what that is. And then you can look at the correlation. Again, you can't do a regression technically because you do not know that spring temperature is driving day of arrival, because that's what we're working on. That's a little bit tautological. So we're doing correlations here.
This doesn't prove
No.
that they're one's dependent on the other.
No, it can't. But there's so much evidence now that is building up and up and up and up that I am comfortable to say, yes, there is a relationship. If you have one study that just shows that, no. But if you have, hundreds, and they're all doing the same thing, going the same direction, something similar is going on. Something is driving this.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
It's really interesting. So, you wouldn't say that this would still be accurate if the temperature, say they were birds and the temperature was rising on a trend of 2 degrees over these years, but they couldn't detect the temperature difference, but the temperature changed the time the speed came off the
That's right.
and so on.
That's right.
Supply chain, so they had.
Absolutely.
You wouldn't say that.
Absolutely.
Therefore, it's not the temperature, it's the food supply.
Well, what's actually driving the food supply to change?
Yeah.
So there's indirect evidence that's going on here. So the insects change. The birds can't move until the insects move. The insects have to hatch, and they are triggered by temperature. So they hatch. As soon as they come out, then the birds can start moving. So there is this, A equals B, B equals C, C equals D, that type of thing. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
So, when he's saying a little bit of, there'd always be a little bit of a lag, possibly. I mean, especially if you have an outlier year where it was very warm very early, that the species might necessarily not as directly correlate because it goes from year to year.
Right. It depends upon the species, and it depends upon how they react to things. A caribou is going to react just like that. If you have something that's a long distance, a neotropical migrant, they're not going to react as exactly the same way. Yeah. Okay? Yeah.
But why is the correlation so good between day of arrival and time?
I'm sorry?
Why is the correlation so good between day of arrival and time? This seems like a really remarkable correlation given the other two.
But the variability, you mean? Is that what you're saying?
There's a lot less variability. So the correlation coefficient for that was 0.66,
Right. Mm-hmm.
which is
Right. Not.
significantly different than the 0.3.
That's true. That is true. Two things are probably going on here. One is I went in and I pulled species and temperature, and this particular example may not be exactly the same that fit together. So that's my fault. But even if they do, what is going on is also what you were saying. There can be indirect effects happening. So there can be this lag. There can be things going on. So the variability, it's not going to be exactly one-to-one. It's not going to be in lockstep. It can't be. Yeah, so there is a lot of variability. Now, you also have to remember, in ecology and biology, if you have an R value of 0.25, you're thrilled. There's so many other things that are going on that it is really, really hard to figure out what's happening. So this is really quite striking. Yeah?
I actually rather you made that distinction for ecology because I work in investment and you wouldn't be that swayed or persuaded.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right.
But if it's meaningful for ecology, then I can appreciate it.
I should have said that before. Yeah. I had a friend of mine, I did my undergraduate degree in math and statistics, and when I decided to switch into biology, a friend of mine said, "Why are you doing that? Anybody can do biology." I said, "I actually think it's the other way around. Math is easier." Physics are a lot easier because you know what the answer is. Here we don't know what the answer is. We're having to try and look at this messy thing. Yeah. Yeah. I don't have them. Sorry. But yes, they are there, of course. But what I'm trying to do is actually just look and see what kind of movement there is. The other thing, too, is we're doing circumstantial evidence kind of like you know of in a trial. So how much circumstantial evidence? You won't convict somebody on one or two or three pieces of circumstantial evidence. But as you build it up, you do, or you can.
There's no relationship between science and the law.
Oh, that's for sure. I'll agree with that 100%. Mm-hmm.
I would request the judge to strike that.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, the time that the animals move, or insects, plants, whatever,
Yeah.
I would expect it to depend on the temperature in the past, not the temperature in the future. And the average spring temperature is probably going to improve the temperature in the future, right?
Okay.
I wonder if somebody has tried to look at it sort of based on temperature over the month before they move.
Yes. Yeah.
That might be trickier.
Yeah. We all have tried to see what the lag is. Is it a year? Is it 5 years? Is it a month? Is it 5 days? That type of thing. It depends upon the species as to how it's going to react. So some species, I can tell you, they'll react immediately. And other species, when I did my study in 1995, finding things that were coming earlier in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, those species were coming from Costa Rica. Now, how did species in Costa Rica know that it was warm and toasty up in Michigan? Good question, huh? So that's something now that a lot of people are working on, and there's evolutionary change that is happening, and there is the subtleness that's going on in other things like the bugs and the seeds and things like that. And also the other thing, when you're talking about day of first arrival, it is just the very first individual of that species that you see. I've done further studies on migration and have found that if you look at when the bulk of the individuals of a species come through, it's always the same time. It's basically queuing on day length. So there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of issues here. So when the bulk is coming through, it's primarily females and young, last year's kids, and they probably are queuing on day length. But males, it behooves them to get up as fast as they can to the breeding grounds, because then they can set up a territory that has all the goodies that they want. And so they are the ones that are pushing the limit. And all of the species, when we have caught them in nets, all of the individuals that have been the first ones to arrive have all been male. So there's a lot of different things going on now as far as, so that's why it's really neat to have 0.35 regression. Yeah?
But you also have a lot of variability in terms of just your in the field observation.
Absolutely.
You have range.
Absolutely.
You don't have an army of people
That's
waiting
right.
to find, you have one or two
Mhm.
observers or something. So
That's right.
you're going to have some standard deviation of error for even if you catch that species when they actually just arrive.
That's right. That's exactly true. So there's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts. Yeah. And if you don't collect your own data, you can't say this is exactly how I did it and I know that. So that's why when I got my dissertation, one of my committee members wouldn't sign my dissertation because I didn't collect my own data. I was working on the entire North American continent.
Carrie, isn't that part of the power of the meta-analysis, though?
Is you pull everything together. That's right. That's why meta-analyses are so important. Is that it's not just one example. It's a lot that are there. Right. Okay. So now what I did is I did this for all the species that I had trends in the species traits and trends in the temperatures. And now what I did was I plotted out the correlation coefficients here. So this is just the number of species that had a correlation coefficient of minus 0.09. And you can see, here's 0. And you can see again this skew that's going that direction. So this is actual. This is measured by thermometers. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to take that same study spot and put a grid over the top of it and look at modeled data for this particular place, for this particular grid. So it's taking in more space, more area than just the study area, and doing the modeling for the time when the study is being done. So everything is cued in to exactly what was going on in that study. So I did the exact same thing again, exactly the same thing again, except I have modeled temperature data here, and that means I have modeled temperature data there. It's exactly the same thing. It's like those red and gray bars, the gray ones that you couldn't see. So we could model the temperature just including natural forcings. We could, and then figure out what the correlation coefficient was. Then we could model the temperature assuming there's anthropogenic forcings and no natural forcings. And then we can model the temperature putting in both, just like they did before. This is for natural, and it's not really surprising that it really is strongly around 0, but there is some skew, a bit of a skew. That is for human, and there it is when you put both in. So what that is basically saying is that what's happening with species, they are responding to the regional temperatures that are warming, and the regional temperature that is warming, we can say, is significantly affected by humans. Okay? No?
My question is, how are you measuring what is it? How are you deciding what is a human and what is a natural?
Oh, the natural is everything like the shifting of the Earth this way, where the Earth is in the ecliptic when at such and such time. The volcanoes, the sunspots, dust storms, things like that. Then when they're just looking at anthropogenic, then they're just putting in the greenhouse gases and cloud feedback and things like that. Yeah.
Is this mostly for migratory species?
These are all phenologies in the springtime, so it's also plants and animals. It's whatever at the location where they did the study, and that's around the globe, and it's all types of species. So
for that spot in Colorado that you just showed us an example, so maybe there's 1 or 2 birds that are migrating from Costa Rica or something.
Could be.
But most of them are plants and animals that just live year round in that area.
Could be. Yeah. There could be both. Both is going on.
Because if it's mostly migratory plants and animals, then you have to look at the other seasons, how the temperature change the other half of the year, because that could be a bigger driver than this.
Sure, it could be a bigger driver. But what I'm doing is I'm only looking at those species that I find a change here, that I actually am finding a change. Now, would I find a stronger change? If I find a stronger change in Costa Rica, I maybe could, but this is what I have, and this is what I use. Yeah. Anything else?
Did the spring temperature go to 1995 as well?
In this situation, yes, I think it does. Yeah. Whatever the species are studied, whatever the time the species was studied, that's the same time that was studied for the temperature. Yeah.
It does seem that bad luck, but over this time period, the effect from the natural causes has amplified the extent of the effect of the human.
This?
Yeah.
I don't know what this is.
If you look at that without the natural, but when you have the natural, you just shift everything to the left.
I don't know what you're saying. Sorry.
Well, if you look at just the natural and just human alone, like both of those distributions are shifted to the right a little bit, but combined, it shifts the distribution to the left.
Well, here's 0. So anthropogenic is shifted to the left.
Right, but when you add the natural causes, it seems to shift even further to the left, down on the actual. If you look at the human alone versus the distribution.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
It seems like there's
something going on.
it's not clear why it shifted.
Yeah, right.
That means there's more correlation.
I think we're trying to add apples and oranges.
I agree.
Okay. Which are the apples and which are the oranges?
Well, is the question here that is the idea that because the combination is a combination, human and natural, you can expect that distribution to be somewhere in between the other two distributions? No, I don't think it should.
No, it's additive.
It doesn't correlate well with the middle, but it correlates very well with the bottom.
And it's additive.
Exactly what you're showing.
Right. And that's what if you take into account how much of the variability is explained by each of these, this amount is much more than the natural. So there's a lot more going on in the human. Okay, you're not convinced, I can tell.
I'm just saying that the temperature model of the combined one matches the actual measured one. Because
Indirectly, based on the arrival of species. I mean, it seems like it's an indirect confirmation of the combined model.
of the combined model. You have to have both.
That's the conclusion.
That you have to have both.
Data points there are kind of leading to that conclusion.
That's right.
You can't reason about anything.
That's right. That's right. If all we had was this, what that's saying is that humans are having an effect on that temperature. Are we saying they're having 2% effect or 80% effect? We're not saying. What I'm saying here is it's more than 2%, because this is skewed over.
Well, no, I think if you're confirming that the variability in the morning matches the variability of the first day of arrival with temperature. I don't think from this you can confirm anything more about human effect on temperature. You're just confirming the existing model in a slightly different angle.
Why? Well, can we go on? Let's go on. I don't, well, okay, I don't know. I will go back through and when I showed this at the COP, a man came up to me and said that he had a whole new statistical way of doing exactly what I'm doing here. So that's the next thing that I want to be doing. Okay?
Has anyone done this study in, say, the last few years? Something like you did when that study 10 years ago, and just did it again?
Yes, Camille did one in Parmesan, did one in 2006.
2006, 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Did she show a similar conclusion?
Yeah. She didn't actually, that wasn't actually a meta-analysis. She didn't do the statistics. What she did do, though, was look at all of the studies that had been done and see how they all lined up together. So there wasn't the statistics.
I wish I studied harder.
Camille's work in 2006 is great. It's a review, and and that allows it to be a lot longer. So it's very, very good. Okay. So now, what happens when species just can't adapt at all? So there's no ability for a species to do something on its own. That's where we're heading. Basically, if a species is in an area and it can't get out of that area, and it still gets hotter and hotter and hotter, and it can't stand that heat, it's going to die. So this is where we're actually heading. Okay, so here's one example of the polar bear. Again, I don't believe that the polar bear is ever going to go extinct, because every single zoo I go into has at least 2, right? What's going to go extinct are the species that rely on the polar bear's habits and behavior in the wild. When a polar bear would kill a seal, it would make a mess everywhere. And that mess is what the rock gull and the ivory gull fed on. Now that they're not able to do that, there is not, well, actually, and the Arctic fox, but the Arctic fox feeds on other things, so that's why that's not as important. But the rock gull and the ivory gull don't feed on other things, and their populations are plummeting. So again, this is one of these instances where you push one species and other species, there's a domino effect that is occurring. So the rock gull and the ivory gull, I think, are, well, they're what we call functionally extinct, and I'll talk about that in a second. So I'm also asked all the time, and when I'm giving talks, is all we need to do is wait for speciation. Okay, yeah, we can, but I'm not sure who all would be on the planet to actually see the species that speciated at that time, because it takes so long. So speciation, yes, you have extinction and you have speciation, but speciation is a lot slower, I guarantee you, than extinction.
The speciation doesn't depend on the complexity of the organism, because viruses mutate fairly often.
That's right.
Obviously, they're not necessarily completely different species, but certain organisms could possibly keep up.
They
Probably not the ones we want to have around.
They can. The easiest explanation is it depends upon how fast their generation time is. If their generation time is every minute, then yeah, they can change rapidly. If an elephant, I'm sorry?
Fruit flies are probably.
Fruit flies, mosquitoes, they've shown, there's an elegant article that was done on mosquitoes that feed in, it's not sundew, it's a carnivorous plant. What's the pitcher plant? Maybe it is the pitcher plant, I don't remember. Anyway, it feeds on whatever gets stuck in these plants that are going to eat them. And they have shown very conclusively that there has been a change now because of that. Now there has been shifts in the gene frequencies of some species. There's been a study that was done by a bunch of people here in the American Museum and Philadelphia Museum. They were looking at these swallows that migrate. And it turns out that the wings of the swallows are getting longer. Now, that's not speciation. What that's doing is it's an adaptation to what's happening. So, and it could be, if there's a gene or 2 or 3 genes that actually dictate how long the wing is which is what ornithologists hope, because we always are measuring wing lengths, then it could be microevolution, but I'm not sure about that. I actually think that by having this all happen, we are going to learn a lot that we have no idea about as far as evolution goes. There's so much in evolution that we're having microevolutionary changes that we said couldn't happen, and they are. Okay, so what we need to do is somehow we need to work with the species and try and help them so they don't go extinct. So here's the hierarchy of actions that need to be taken. First of all, we need to be monitoring for changes. We need to know if a species is doing better or if it's doing worse, or if it's staying the same. And that is important because we're going to have to start prioritizing, and that's where that's going to come in. I'll talk about that in a minute. We can also start managing species. So species that are in trouble, we can start managing them in a way that will keep them, or hopefully will keep them from going extinct. And then the other thing is we can do something that's called managed relocation. For the biologists in here, that's the same thing as assisted migration. This is just the new term for it, managed relocation, where they go, they pick up the species and everything it needs, puts it in a U-Haul trailer, moves it over here, drops it down, and manages it until it takes hold. And then we have things that are out of our direct control. What do we do then? Okay, continue monitoring and managing. This is a Kirtland's warbler. It's a very, very rare species. It used to occur in Wisconsin. I don't remember where else. Anyway, and in Michigan. Now the range is restricted to Michigan. It has very, very, very precise needs. It has to have trees that are only so tall. It has to have soil that is so sandy that it can lose the water and it won't hurt the nests that are. This is a warbler that nests on the ground, which is kind of crazy. On and on and on. It has all these restrictions. But what we've done is we've done a really good job of managing it in these locations. And what we found was that the cowbird, which is like the cuckoo, the cowbird will come in and lay an egg in the Kirtland warbler nest, kill the baby Kirtland warblers, and then the parents have to raise this cowbird. It is illegal to kill any species, any native species, and that was what needed to happen here. And so it had to go all the way to Congress to say we've got to start trapping the cowbirds and killing them so that they weren't ruining the Kirtland's warbler. And that in itself, plus a prescribed burn that got loose and just burned most of this part here, almost basically all of it. Those are the two things that really changed the management and had it work. Okay, so now, when do we have managed relocation? Okay, well, what I'm saying here is we can't stop doing this. We've got to continue managing species. Okay, managed relocation. What happens here? Well, this is what happens when a species has absolutely no accessible habitat to get to. So, like the northern flying squirrel in the lower peninsula of Michigan, it can't get anywhere. It's stuck. So, what happens then is it's not going to make it unless we go in and do something. So that's what we are calling now species are functionally extinct, meaning that if we leave them completely alone, they're not going to make it. Or it will be really quite surprising if they make it. Certainly there are species out there that we don't know everything about and we'll think that they're going to toast and they don't toast, but most of them will. So these can go either to extinction or they can go into managed relocation. Now, managed relocation is a tough thing to do. It takes a lot of resources. And, oops, I'm not there yet, sorry. Here's an example of species that need to be relocated, managed and relocated. So as we have sea level rise going up, not only are people going to be forced off their islands, species are too. So we need to be concerned about those. There's no place for them to go. Habitat islands on the mainland is the same thing. This is a sky island in southeastern Arizona, and it's flat on the top, and there are species that live up on the top that don't live anyplace else. And when it starts getting hot, they can't crawl down, move over, and go to another place. It just doesn't work that way. And this is a recent study that was just done, and what it did was look at how far away cool places were from other places. And basically what it's showing you is where the mountains are. So what's happening is that a species here is able to shift into an area that is cooler this way. But a species here doesn't have any place to move into. And a species here, that's at the top of the mountains, don't have any place to move into. Same thing as up there. So this is just somehow a way of trying to quantify what might be going on, what might be happening about species movement. But there are a lot of obstacles. Money is a big one, but I think that we could get past that if we needed to. Political power and political will, that's a tough one. It's better now, but I'm not sure how well it is going to stay. People power, do we have the people that are going to be willing to pick up these species, move them, and manage them? Do we have the space? Where are we going to put these species? That's another problem here. Infrastructure, we need to have some place where all this is coordinated. We need to make sure that the species that we move doesn't become an invasive species and kill all the rest of the species where we moved it to. And then the other one is we really just don't have the knowledge. We don't know how to move these species. We just don't know what they need in order to make sure that they stay around. So it's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough. It has been done. The California condor, it wasn't working very well in California. They moved it to the Grand Canyon, and now it's working fairly well. So there are instances. But there's also, well, we won't go in there. Okay. So there is managed relocation. We can use it. But now what about those species that are out of our direct control? This is extinction rate. This is background rate of extinction. It is less than 1 species per 1,000 species per millennium. Recently, this is mammals. This is mammals, birds, amphibians, and this is everything. So recently, mammals have come up to 100 species going extinct per 1,000 species in a millennium. That's 4 more orders of magnitude. It has changed 4 orders of magnitude. This rate of change is the same type of rate of change that we saw when there is a mass extinction happening. So that's indeed where I think we are going. I think we are indeed going to go into mass extinction, and I'm not sure there's much we can do about it. So what we can do, well, there are things that we can do that aren't fun to do, and one of the things is to prioritize. And prioritize by saying, this species, we can spend a lot of time, energy, and effort on it, and it may not make it. This species, if we spend that same amount of energy and effort and money, it probably will. And this species over here, we just need to monitor, make sure that it's not in trouble. We need to let go of these species. So we need to do prioritizing. We need to do triage. If we don't, we're going to lose more species than we would otherwise. And that's a tough thing. How do you prioritize? Who prioritizes? I don't know the answer to those questions. We can't do it in North America or in America because we have the Endangered Species Act, which says we don't let species go extinct. I think we may be coming to the place where we are going to have to do that. But there are things we can do. We're not certain why they disappeared, but archaeologists speculate that they had something to do with their size. The world is changing. We will eventually not make Hummers anymore. It is changing. We have to be pushing on this change and changing what we're doing. We have to also decrease the other threats because there's a synergistic effect with the species. We have land use change. Here are just examples in the boreal forest. This is tar sands. If tar sands go, it's going to be quite a disaster. And dams. So if we can decrease the other threats on these species, they may be able to withstand some more of the stress from climate change. Here's an example. This is the Edith Bay checker spot butterfly. This is work from Camille Parmesan. She did work on this species all up the Pacific coast, starting down in Baja, and she found that the species, this particular one, was moving up north on Baja, and all of these particular places didn't have any butterflies anymore. But the ones up here weren't moving, so it was just squishing and squishing and squishing. These guys couldn't move, probably because Tijuana and San Diego were in the way. So we assumed that this subspecies is extinct. And that's what's going to happen to an awful lot of species. You have this synergy that is actually harder on the species than just having 1 or 2 things happening. Now, one way we can do it, you can't see any of these, is we can put in corridors, and we need to have corridors that are going north to south so that they can, at least here, so that they can be getting to the cooler areas, or in areas where there are mountains, you can have them going east to west, but up the mountains. Now that's tough because there's a lot of people who say, my cabin's right there, you're not going to have a corridor right there. So there's those things that we need to somehow change too. Here are some corridors that have been proposed. Number 1 is for the salmon. Number 2 is for the grizzly bear. 3 is for the antelope. 4 is for mule deer. 5 is for the wolf. I don't remember which one. 6 is for the whooping crane, and this is a tough one because the entire population of whooping cranes is here in the wintertime. And if you have a hurricane or you have an oil spill, the entire population will be lost. 7 is the monarch butterflies, and 8 is the lynx. So these are ones that people are seriously pushing right now to try and make sure that people say that have houses along this way, that they actually plant the plants that the butterflies need. So there's different ways that we can do this, and it is working. Also this, did Steve show you this? He may have. Okay. If you look at tons of CO2 emissions from the world, it's here. California, that's not horrible. The United States, that's worse. And then Texas is worse. Now, there's something that we're doing that Texas needs to start doing. And so somehow we have got to get our culture, whatever that is, into the rest of the United States. And I do think it can happen. Yeah?
Where's the sustainable line on there?
I don't know.
I know it keeps moving as the population grows, but where is it right now?
I don't know. I'm sorry.
Well, presumably it's below the California line.
Yes.
It might or might not be below the border.
I assume that it's in here. But I don't know. I can't tell you for sure. Yep.
Sustainable for what?
For us.
Well, even if we stop global warming, stop CO2 going to the atmosphere, there's still a lag, whatever. We're not going to stop extinction, especially going from 6 billion to 9 billion people and having plants and species lose and getting
That's right.
habitat.
That's right. And you can go into the IPAT equation and say it does have to do with population, it does have to do with affluence. Technology is going to help, but it's not going to be, it's going to take a while. So from now until 2050, pretty much whatever we do, it's not going to change. It's going to change things after 2050. So we have to understand that that's going to happen. Okay, so most of you are older, and you can say, but the words of the prophets are written on the subway walls, right? Simon and Garfunkel. So nice to talk to a crowd that knows that. Okay, now I didn't do this. Steve didn't do this. A good friend of ours was late to a meeting. He's always late to a meeting. He was chairing it, and he ran into the subway in Washington, D.C. and saw this. And he said, I don't care how late I am. They might take it down. And he turned around, he ran all the way back to his hotel, got his camera, came up, and took a picture of it. And now all of us have this picture. This is what we need to do, and we can. If I didn't think we could do that, I wouldn't be doing this. I'd be off in Disneyland someplace. This is a really tough job. It's hard to go around telling people we could lose 400,000 species. We really can lose 400,000 species without much effort. We could lose a lot more than that too. But there are species that we can save, and that's what I look at. And we just have to start having some kind of different way of looking at the world. We can. It's going to be hard, but I do think we can do it. Thanks. Yep.
Speaking of managed relocation, how about the pikas?
How about the pikas? I have an article in my inbox right now that I was supposed to read about pikas. The pikas, some people say they're in trouble, some people say they're not. I think what you need to do is look at which populations are in trouble and which ones are not. And the ones in the Great Basin are in trouble. And it's not just because there isn't more mountain that they can go up and get cooler. They're very, very sensitive to heat, very sensitive to heat. So they need to be where it's cool. But they need more than just cool. They have to have these big boulders to live in. And so if you go up the mountains and you run out of boulders, it still isn't going to be good enough for a pika. I gave a talk one time, and a little boy, after I said that, just was jumping up and down in his chair, and I said, yes, 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 what do you want to say? And he says, all we have to do is get helicopters and take boulders up into the mountains and drop them, and then we can save them. So it's that kind of crazy stuff that actually we may have to start doing. So I know.
Yeah, my wife and I were 3 days in Mount Rainier last summer, and we were looking for pikas for 3 days, because we never heard of them.
Never heard them?
We saw a few marmots.
Yeah. Marmots are having a hard time because they have a thing called brown fat, and the way that they put on brown fat is to eat a particular type of plant, and that type of plant now is not growing in the heat. So they're not putting on the brown fat, which means that they're not being able to stay in hibernation, as deep a hibernation as they need to. They're coming out earlier, and there's nothing to eat. So there's a lot of different things. Yeah?
Do you see much energy around the concept of captive breeding for some of these species that has been done with the Congo?
Yeah. Let me tell you a story. I was asked to give a talk to all of the directors of the aquaria and zoos in North America. And it was a fantastic group of people. And I went early so I could see what was going on. So the talk before mine was actually a panel. And it was run by Julie Packard. And she had funded, plus others, had funded a way to captively breed all of our frogs and toads in North America. There are 301 frogs and toads in North America. I didn't know that until that day. I now know that. What she did was she said each aquaria or zoo takes 3 species. And then given how many zoos and aquaria there are out there, it's a pretty good guess that things won't go extinct. And everybody thought this was great, go for it, everybody agreed, everybody, did everything. And I'm listening to Julie, and I'm thinking, this is what we need. Then the panel came up, and it was people who had those frogs and toads in their facilities. And they said, we can't do it because it takes too much infrastructure, the people hours are just incredible. The public don't give a damn about 3 frogs and toads, so we don't get any money from it at all. We have to feed them, and we're not real sure how to feed some of them, and we've got to experiment and the like. We can't do this. I sat there, and my hope just went like that. If we can't keep 3 toads and frogs alive in zoos, we're not going to be able to do other things. We will be able to keep polar bears, because we know how to do that. But other things, we can't use captive breeding, I don't believe. Maybe some things, but not most. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm really interested in the triage work that you're working on right now and how you're approaching that. And what, you already described the situation where you're looking at those species that might be easier to maintain.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if you're also looking at the importance of indigenous species, so whether they're keystone or foundational species, and then correlating that with ease of maintenance over time. Right.
So what you're basically asking is what do you use to prioritize species?
Yep.
That's a really tough issue, and what you have to do is you have to come up with all of the various schemes and see which ones are biologically important first, I feel. At least that's what I'm doing. And then we have to look and see what's socially important also. Now, when I say biologically important, that includes keystone species. It probably doesn't include the California condor, and it probably doesn't include the Kirtland's warbler. But we know how to manage them, and it's happening, so that's okay. But we have to worry about how much money, how many people we have. It's going to be a really tough thing because who's going to be the one who plays God? In reality, I think what's going to happen is none of us, and things are just going to go extinct, and it's going to be really, really hard to try and do triage. So, especially in the U.S., because you can't go in and say get rid of the Endangered Species Act, because that's one of the strongest bills that we've got for species. So it's a whole, it's very, very difficult. So we've got all these lists going and trying to figure out which ones we need to let go for sure, and trying to figure out the ones that we aren't worried about. If we can do that, then we can concentrate on these ones. Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder whether you should be looking at the problem from the other side, which is rather than trying to pick the species that you want to keep, or maybe instead we should decide, one of the best ways to try to preserve a species is to create protected habitats and then create corridors between them. And then in some sense leave it to God. Just say, rather than spending money on programs and zoos or aquarium or whatever, just say, the real focus of it is preserving habitats or land areas or whatever.
Yeah.
And creating diversity of the ones that are going to try to preserve and make sure that they're as representative as possible of the different climates or subclimates within them.
That's right. Right. What he's saying is that we need to be actually preserving the lands, the habitats where the species are. Instead of looking at one species, look at the area. And I agree with you completely, but the requirements of species are so wide that if you have a corridor that works for a mountain lion, it can actually be detrimental to something small, a rat, a riparian rat, because the corridor is so narrow that it can't get the food it needs, but it still is able to survive there. So there's a lot of dynamics that you need to work on with corridors also. I do agree that we've got to be looking at habitat, and I think what we need to do is we need to start with our wildlife refuges, because at wildlife refuges we know how to manage things. We've done a really good job. And if we can somehow connect those, that would be super important. But it's very difficult when it has to go through San Diego. It's very difficult. I testified in front of Barbara Boxer's committee, and she said, well, what do we do? And I said, we have to do something crazy. We have to start having, excuse me, we have to start having, instead of stable managed areas, we have to have dynamic managed areas. So as the species moves, the management goes with it. How do you do that? I have no idea. But it's a way of thinking. We've got to somehow come up with crazy ideas like that. They're doing it in the oceans. So they're doing it on the shores. So
do we know why San Diego is a block? What is it about that urban area that makes it
I assume for that particular butterfly it was the host plant. There weren't any host plants around, so that it could go from host plant. Some butterflies, not all of them, but some butterflies basically do that. They just go from host plant to host plant, and the host plants weren't there.
So one way to look at it is to get away from endless barren concrete. You somehow have to put more plantations, more greenery in our urban areas.
Well, yeah, but you have to be careful what you're putting in, right? Yeah. And I think what we need to do is we need to somehow change the way we all think about species. We need to start thinking about, God, it is really great. I have planted such and such in my backyard, and I really hope the butterfly comes through, instead of saying, oh, I don't want any endangered species on my land, because then somebody will come along and take my land. So we've got to somehow change what's going on, and I think we can. I think there's an awful lot of people out there that are concerned about species. So, yeah.
To get a sense of the scale of the extinction, I think in your plot you listed from 1,000 to 2,000 species per thousand.
That was something that Bob May did, and I don't think it's supported. Okay. Yeah.
But we're talking about significant percentage.
Yes. Yeah. The thing that I'm concerned about from the plot that Bob did is the actual rate. The extinction rate that is going 4 orders of magnitude is quite high. It's very, very high. So, and I have given talks where people have said, why are you exaggerating so? I wish I were exaggerating. I truly believe this is what's going to happen. I really do. Yeah.
So, I find it interesting that you still think that people are going to come together and try to address this problem. I mean, I actually am a little bit more cynical about it. I mean, if you actually look at what's important to people at large,
Oh, I know.
in terms of the economy,
They
when they
don't
start
care.
losing their jobs, when they start,
Yep.
I mean, when you start passing laws that
Mhm.
are effectively portrayed throttling people's standard of living,
Yep.
you know, forget about the species.
That's right.
Forget, I mean, and
That's right.
so,
I'm on a National Academy of Sciences panel right now that's looking at which of the scenarios do we think that America could live through. And the person who requested the whole committee to do something, I couldn't understand what he was saying. And so finally I just interrupted and I said, and what actually do you think how are plants and animals important to what you're talking about? He says, they're not important at all. You don't need to be on this committee.
so,
No.
so some of the argument has to be made that biodiversity has economic value.
Yeah, that's a slippery slope.
You know, creating allies across
Well,
odd places.
that's what Gretchen Daly is doing with natural capital, and she's doing a spectacular job. I have a little bit of trouble with it because I think it is a slippery slope, but if it's going to try and help us save species, then that's where I think we go. That's what we have to do. But I would love to be able to save species just because it's a species. But that's me. Yeah.
Yeah, this is going on to the last question. I mean, what is the impact of species getting extinct to us as humans?
It really depends upon the species, and I think this is what's important. When Meg was saying, you know, Terry, how are you doing the triage? This is one of the things that we need to figure out, is people will always say, well, how many species do we actually need? Right? We only need 20 species. Well, that's not true. What we do need to do is we need to figure out what species we actually need and what those species then rely on. And then we have to have a guess factor of what those rely on, so that we are able to save all of them. But we're not. Some of them, if we lose pollinators, I don't remember what the number is, 80-something% of our crops are pollinated by wild insects and birds, I think. I think birds are in there too. They are, okay. If something happens and we lose those, who's going to go out and pollinate all that? They're doing that in China now because they don't have the insects. They're having to go out and hand pollinate things. So there's going to be a lot of changes that are going to have to occur. That's what's coming. Yeah.
There's a lot of stimulus funding available for workforce development, and I'm just curious if any of that's going towards like ecosystem services or a lot of the activities that you're talking about, management, migration, things that it sounds like you need more support on. I don't know if it's too science-based that it wouldn't really be oriented towards that, but you see so much funding going towards energy efficiency and boots on the roof for solar installers, and I'm just curious if there's a nexus or an opportunity there.
There is some. They've given stimulus money to NSF, and a lot of people are going to that. My problem with that is that scientists need to stop talking to scientists. Scientists need to start talking to managers. And we don't need more papers that say, you know, this species is doing this, and then leave it. We need papers that say, it's doing this, and this is what you could do. This is how you could do it, and I'll be willing to help you. That's a whole new way of looking at biology. And it's a whole big trend now that's just, there's all of a sudden a screeching going on and everybody's going that way. Not everybody. You know, not everybody can talk to the public. I don't want every scientist to talk to the public. That's not a good idea. But I do think that's what's needed. And that's another part of the work that I'm doing, is working hard at training young people, postdocs and graduate students, to help them understand that they don't just sit there and widget. They've got to figure out what to do. We don't have that luxury anymore. Yeah.
In the mode of thinking sort of on a crisis basis, is there any effort to try and get graduate students to just go out and kind of document the habitat, like the problem of how do you take care of this little frog?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, rather than spend 10 years studying whether it's tame,
Right.
can we have graduate students go out and take 3 months to understand it uses this plant, it needs to be near water, it goes up this high, or whatever it is, so that at some time in the future you could take a sort of summary analysis of what that habitat has to be for minimum dimensions and use that to help with survival later.
Right, right. And I do think that is going on in a lot of the land grant schools are doing that. I just came back from giving talks at Michigan State, and they're doing a lot of exactly that. There's a lot of rapid evaluation that's happening right now. Some of it's good and some of it's not, but that's okay. You know, that's the kind of thing we need to be doing. You're exactly right. Yeah.
Well, I just want to respond to the fellow in the back who said, well, the species that are important are the ones that affect our jobs. There were some words to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about, last night, I went to hear George Schaller.
Yeah.
He was at Stanford last night giving a talk.
Yeah, he was.
And he's one of my heroes. And
Mine too.
I heard him say that the mountain gorillas, I think they're mountain gorillas, on the inactive volcanoes in Rwanda, they're actually training 2 or 3 generations of park rangers and naturalists, and they actually get a lot of money from tourism. People all over the world who go to that place in Africa to see the gorillas, and so the villages get some of the tourism money, and they now protect the gorillas.
Right.
And actually, there's a war going on with some neighboring on the other side of the ocean,
right.
Rwanda and Botswana and so on are fighting.
Kind of, yeah.
And some of these rangers actually, they get into firefights with
they're killed.
with the army, and some get killed, but they're defending these gorillas.
That's right.
And that's a really big change.
That is a huge change. And I think that it is a change that we have to be doing, not that they have to be doing. When I was a graduate student, we went to see the monarch butterflies. Oh, we got to stop. The monarch butterflies in Mexico. And we got there, and we got out of the van, and we were met by 5 men with machine guns pointed at us. Because what this jerk did, he's a very eminent scientist, he's a jerk. He'd been there for 7 years. He still was saying Buenos dias to people when it was nighttime. He had convinced the powers that be that the forest had to be closed, so nobody could go in and use it. Well, here's these people, they don't have wood to cook their food with, they don't have wood to keep their kids warm. I mean, why don't they take advantage of, just like the guides for the gorillas? We need to have that population be so proud of the fact that they have the monarch butterflies there and they're going to protect them. But if we have a scientist that's this jerk that comes in and locks the gate with like 7 locks, literally, you know, that shouldn't be allowed, and it is. Yeah.
Wasn't there a danger in just limiting it to species that have defined economic consequences? I think you talked about, you know, the wolves, fighting out the wolves and the coyotes, increase now they're all the way across the U.S. So aren't we kind of playing gambling?
Oh, we're gambling big time, big time, and all we can do is base it on the knowledge that we've got, and that's all we can do. So, but we're out of time, so I'll be happy to stand here and answer questions if you want. So, thanks.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.